rules, you all know the game. Try to do what's right. I swear I can't complain if I die tonight. But I don't think it's in the stars for me to go that way. I'll be here for a long, long time, babe. I'm here to stay. I was born to rock and roll, everything I need. I was born with a hammer down. I was built for speed. Alright guys, very sad day today. I found out that Phil Campbell passed away. Totally unexpected. Right? Totally unexpected. I thought he was going to, probably outlast them all. But, unfortunately, he's gone. I've covered a lot of the kind of the Faceted Clark lineup here. Not much of, anything after that. Not because I don't want to or because I don't like it. It's just that, some of that stuff is, a little bit different. Some of it's a little bit harder because you have, two guitars and things like that. But, just wanted to talk about that. Phil Campbell, him and Wurzel, right? They both stepped into, big shoes because after Faceted Clark left, you had Brian Robertson and he didn't work out, right? You had Another Perfect Day. And then after that, this is a huge sort of, like I said, big shoes to fill given the legacy of Motorhead. And, I could tell you all kinds of stories about Phil Campbell, but I don't think they're kosher. So, it's that lifestyle, dude. It's that Motorhead lifestyle to where, because, he's Persian. Right? He used to be in a band called Persian Risk before Motorhead. So he's kind of like, I think he's Farsi or maybe something, similar to that, like maybe like Freddie Mercury, right? Freddie Mercury's Farsi. So he's got that kind of, right? He's got that kind of basically, lineage. I don't know what portion, but, he's got that kind of lineage. So Persian guys, they live a long time. Typically they live, right well into their 70s and, 80s. So for him to die at 64, right, this can only be sort of, and they haven't really, revealed the cause of death yet, but he was ill for a long time. Similar to Lemmy and, Wurzel, I think, right, similar. It's that part of this, and, what I'm saying is speculation, obviously, but, every Motorhead fan knows this, I think. Is that a lot of this is that lifestyle because Motorhead, as I've said before, is the only band that sort of deserves that fandom that you immediately connect to. Even Black Sabbath doesn't have that, right? Black Sabbath, the songs are cool, they're, what I mean? Their songs are cool, they all look the part, everything else is cool, right? But no band has the connection of Motorhead. No band. Right? If any band, deserved to be rock stars, right, it would be Motorhead. So they really live that lifestyle. So a lot of this is that lifestyle bit to where, especially like Wurzel and, Phil Campbell, right? A lot of these guys, probably tried to at least keep up with Lemmy or, in the ballpark of, his habits. And literally nobody can do that. Right? Even Lemmy, with all this stuff, he died at 70, right? And that's pushing it. He said that, he was surprised, you know what I mean? Right? Given his habits. So, I put a video up on the Metalhead's Journey channel about Paul Di'Anno. He was a party guy, right? And he said, this is why I put that video up. He said, whenever I go, out with Lemmy to drink, there's no way I can compete with him. I can't keep him with them. Good Lord, right? So Paul Diano says that he cannot keep up with Lemmy, and that there's no way that I could compete with him. And Paul Diano, we know, he's hardcore, right? So imagine how hardcore Lemmy is. So given that lifestyle, right? All of Motorhead, lived that lifestyle. So it probably had something to do with it. I mean, I don't think this is some big, revelation or anything, but it's that party style, man. Uh, like I said, I don't think I'm revealing anything that most people don't already know. You know, uh, I think a year before Lemmy died, right, or like 6 months before, they had put out a statement and they said, Lemmy enjoys his daily speed, but other than that, he only drinks once in a while. And I was like, wait, hang on, did you catch that? Daily speed, daily, right? So, I mean, these guys were into it hardcore. So, like I said, the other guys in the band, I'm pretty sure they tried to, keep up with at least in Lemmy's ballpark. And that shit's going to kill you, basically. I remember telling one of my friends, uh, in college, I was like, man, Motorhead, they snort crank every day. And I was like, dude, if you snort crank every day, you'd die. That's what he said. So this is not for everybody, obviously, right? So you got to have right? Lemmy is an exception. So there's no way that anyone can try to keep up with him. So, I mean, that's the thing. It's that, I mean, I don't want to get into details. I've already said too much. But I'm guessing that, the habits of Motorhead probably, uh, had something to do with, reduced lifespan. I mean, Fast Eddie Clark said this, his own words. He said, this isn't, this kind of rock and roll star lifestyle, right? It isn't good for you. He said something to that extent. And, he was hardcore into it because, they would all kind of, have these speedy nights, as he said, right? And then he quit. But, he's still, I mean, he passed away at 67. Phil Campbell now 64, right? And then I think Wurzel like 62, right? Wurzel was even a bigger partier. Wurzel was just like all just party, dude, right? So hopefully you guys can read through the lines as I said. I didn't want to be explicit, but that's the thing here is that this lifestyle, right? They pretty much all died in their 60s. They didn't even make it past like 65, right? Like I said, Eddie I think 67, and then Lemmy 70, which is the exception really. But probably that lifestyle had something to do with this. I mean, my uncle, he was a smoker, right? And he died at 67. Dying at 67 in this age, right, is really that's kind of crazy, because the average lifespan even for a white person is 76. So, uh, right. So if because he smoked, he shaved away pretty much, even by American standards is 76. Asian people usually live up to about 83, right? So he pretty much, shaved off about anywhere from 10 to 15 years of his life, just because he was a smoker. So these vices will get you. And I think that, in the long run, I mean, that's the thing is that thrash guys should be, paying attention here because a lot of those guys are in their 60s already, right? 67, 64, these ages are pretty young to go. You know what I mean? With modern technology, I mean, it's, right? Average life expectancy for a white person, like I said, is about 76. For Persian people, it's pushing 80. Asian people, probably, 83 to 86. Average life expectancy. Doesn't mean that everyone's going to live to that age, obviously, right? But average means that that's usually about the time that, this is very, ethnic. So, according to the race, this is usually around the time that people die. I mean, there's all kinds of exceptions, right? Churchill lived up to 100, and he supposedly, drank a bottle of rum every day, and then, smoked a cigar, right? So it's that kind of stuff to wear, but hard drugs will kind of, I think, kind of accelerate this, so I don't know. I really thought that because of his, Persian descent, I thought that he would be, I thought he would outlive them all. So this is very unexpected. I'd heard about some of the health, issues he's had, but this is very unexpected. Like I said, I'm, very saddened. Now, pretty much the only Motorhead people alive are, there's actually three Motorhead people alive still, right? There's Brian Robertson, who is the guitar player from, Another Perfect Day. And then there's Mickey D, obviously the drummer. He used to be in Merciful Fate, I think, before, and then after he, joined Motorhead, now he's with Scorpions. And then, Lucas Fox, the drummer from the first album, he's still there. Right, I follow him on Instagram, so he's still there. He actually just said something about Motorhead, and he said that, he had said that, because, if you're into like early Motorhead, kind of the legend and lore, right? There's all these characters. So Lemmy would talk about Motorcycle Irene, and I was always wondering who the hell is that? And then it turns out that was Lucas Fox's girlfriend. He just talked about that like 2 or 3 days ago, and he said that's when he met Lemmy. And then Motorcycle Irene introduced him to Lemmy, and then Lemmy was like, and then you can watch that story on Instagram anyway. Uh, but supposedly Phil Campbell met Lemmy when he was only 12 years old, and then he got an autograph. So I don't know when that would be, what tour that would have been in, but uh, right. So he was a big fan. He was a, I think, longtime fan, stepping into big shoes. And then after Wurzel left, even bigger shoes where, he had to, he definitely had the ability to just write riffs, right? The riffs were kind of flowing. There's something to be said about that because sometimes, a lot of times people get creative block and they can't really write. So he was a prolific writer, I think. Phil Campbell was definitely a prolific writer to where he can just sort of come up with these riffs, right? Do you guys remember that one? I'm playing some of the stuff from Orgasmatron. The first thing I played was Built for Speed. And then I think this was what I just played if I played it right. It's Mean Machine. So anyway, I mean, definitely, I mean, it's pretty much, even the last, incarnation of Motorhead, if you will. Everybody's gone except basically, Mickey D. Because Phil Taylor's gone. So like I said, only three people from the, the Motorhead lineup is still there. Larry Wallace died, if you recall, a couple of years ago. So right now, the only guitar player that Motorhead has had still alive is Brian Robertson. So like I said, I mean, and Motorhead were busy. They were putting out an album almost like every year, every 2 years. If you look at their catalog, it's huge, right? After Orgasmatron, then Rock and Roll. I really like Rock and Roll. Rock and Roll was one of my favorites, right? And then 1916 as well. After Rock and Roll, right? That was like 89 or something like that, right? And then it's like it was 88 or 89, probably 88, I think. And then 1916, and then they started kind of changing direction, going in a different kind of style. So, but I do like 1916. I like a lot of the, and they've had, good songs all throughout, you know what I mean? And then, like I said, Lemmy's lyrics, obviously they're really, really great. I really don't know what to say because this was completely unexpected. I wasn't going to do this video. I wasn't going to put out a video at all. But, today. But, yeah, I mean, definitely, I mean, only 64. Right? So that is pretty crazy. I mean, I think even in like, when Lemmy died, right? Phil Campbell couldn't fly to the funeral because they had said that his doctor had advised him, don't fly. So he had been battling with, some kind of illness for, for a while now, right? Because, I mean, Lemmy died in 2015, so that was like 10 years ago, like almost, right? Or, more than 10 years ago. So he has, had, even when Motorhead was playing, I think he was hospitalized. So, there's all kinds of crazy stuff. Like I said, I don't want to, talk about it, but, partying is a, core thing of Motorhead, right? It's that thing to where, that's what they really lived, that rock and roll, lifestyle. So like I said, I'll say it again. I honestly thought Phil would be one of the last people to go because, uh, right. But then, he was, he was into partying, just like just like Wurzel and, Lemmy. So, uh, right, it is gonna, take its toll. So I don't know. I mean, I think probably, a lot of times it's like the spirit. Once the spirit is kind of wounded, right? It's hard to recover. I'm sure, like, when Motorhead stopped, that was a huge blow to him, right? They would have just kept going, right? When Lemmy died, and when you've been in a band with that, for that long, from like basically 1984 to 2015, right? And then all of a sudden it stops and it's over. I mean, what do you do, right? So that must have been a huge, moral blow to him, because it's like, uh, right? Because that's the band he grew up in, and then all of a sudden he can't do it anymore. So uh, I'm sure that he probably things like that will take a a bit of a toll on you, right? So plus he was already sick, so yeah, I mean, real sad to see him go. Completely unexpected, completely unexpected. I still can't believe it, but so I mean, I don't know. I mean, it just seems like he's put in so much effort into Motorhead, right? Coming up with a lot of the riffs, especially after Wurzel left, probably, one of the main writers, right? Because Lemmy, he said that he was very good. Sometimes Lemmy would have ideas himself, right? Supposedly, like a song like Chase is Better Than the Catch from Ace of Spades. I think Eddie Clark said that was Lemmy's. Like most of that was Lemmy's, right? So Lemmy will come up with some of his own stuff. But, if you're a bass player and a singer, you're dependent on the guitar player to come up with the riffs, right? So Lemmy was really good at like arranging. He's made that claim before that he was really good at arranging, and uh, it's a type of band where I think it's not just one writer. They've always given credit to everybody because they understand that one guy can write most of it, but then when he takes it to the band kind of rearranges it, plays it a few more times, does this, does that. So all that stuff counts as songwriting. So they've always sort of given, right? They've always sort of given, credit to everybody. I think he had the rock and roll spirit. Phil Campbell had the rock and roll spirit down, definitely. You know what I mean? Right. A lot of what he, sort of absorbed from Lemmy, and Lemmy sort of taught him the way. And I think because I mean, I think they're like 17 years apart. So 16 or 17 years apart. So I'm sure when he joined Motorhead, it was like, joining a band where, uh, right, where Lemmy basically shows you the way and say, well, this is how it's done. This is because both of those guys, Wurzel used to be in a band called Bastard, I think, before. Uh, and then Lemmy thought it was weird that Lemmy thought it was funny that Motorhead was originally going to be called Bastards, right, or Bastard. And then the record company said, well, you never play anywhere with that name. So, so yeah, Motorhead legacy is definitely huge. I mean, it's got so many. I mean, look at the Larry Wallace lineup. It's really cool. I really like that period of of Motorhead, even though it only lasted one album, right? We've got On Parole. We've got some of those songs on the first Motorhead album, self-titled, right? And then of course, the Fast City Clark stuff, I like that, a lot, which is good, which is a great run. And then after that, Another Perfect Day. There's a great, couple of great songs on there. I think, a lot of it's good. The production is really good. I do like it. I do like Another Perfect Day. And, I love Orgasmatron. I love rock and roll, and then, a lot of albums here and there. I like, uh, the stuff they did in the 90s, like I said, huge catalog. The 90s, the 2000s, and then, uh, right, the 2010s. So definitely, I don't know. I mean, I kind of don't know what to say other than just be like, he really put his effort into Motorhead. I think, he lived the spirit, right? So he was definitely a rock and roll trooper, giving it his best, giving Motorhead worthy riffs, I think, definitely. Uh, and, it's part of that lifestyle. Like I said, the things that I say about the lifestyle, I don't mean to say anything bad. You know what I mean? I hope you understand that. I don't mean to say anything bad. That is just the lifestyle of Motorhead. Even Lars Ulrich said that, Motorhead is not just a band, but it's like a lifestyle. And like I said, it's the only band that sort of deserves, adoration. Like you look at Motorhead and you listen to music, and immediately you're like, these guys should be rock stars. These guys should be rock stars, right? And you don't get that from anybody else. You don't get that from anybody else. I don't get that from Metallica, or I don't get that, you know what I mean? I don't get that from Black Sabbath. I appreciate those bands for their music, right? Motorhead is the only band that you appreciate for the full package, right? Everything, the look, the vocals, right? Lemmy sings high, but he sings low. He sings kind of a low high, which is really, it's kind of hard to pull off, right? So I could talk about Motorhead all day long. I've made, how many videos have I made about Motorhead here, So, and I was eventually going to get to some other, like I said, after Fast City Clark, uh, right, things here and there. But there's so much to cover in the beginning of Motorhead that, we kind of got lost with, but like I said, I don't know. I mean, definitely, I think he, stepped up to the challenge, right? Stepped up to the challenge, a great soloist too. I love the solo in Rock and Roll, the song Rock and Roll. How does that go? That's the one that goes, well, here, babe, look at me and look at someone else. I haven't heard these songs in a long time. Anyway, the solo on that one, it's one of my favorite solos that he's done. I mean, he's done a lot of great solos, but that one just sticks in my head. You know what I mean? The first solo, I think it's Phil Campbell's. So definitely knew his sound, right? Knew his sound, knew how to solo tastefully, which is definitely something that is worth mentioning, because he followed in the line of, like, the other great players, right? He's from that old school to where he can still play a solo that's like really good. He can still play a solo that's like tasty, instead of just like a flurry of notes that doesn't make sense. So so definitely, yeah, I think, and like I said, after Wurzel left, he had the challenge of basically being the only guitar player. So it's one thing to be a three-piece band and then become a three-piece band again, but having been a three-piece band and then you become a four-piece band, and then now you're a three-piece band, well, how do you play all those songs, right? How do you play all those songs that were written, as a four-piece? So that's got to be challenging, because now he's got to play both solos, right? So I think he definitely, stepped up to the challenge there. I mean, and executed really well, uh, right? So I actually thought that he would just kind of, keep playing, because I know he had his band with, Phil Campbell and the Bastard Sons, and right. I just thought he would keep playing. He'd even talked. I think he was. Didn't he just appear like last year or something? I heard him speak. He seemed okay, right? Uh, with the Lemmy statue, and then he said that Lemmy visits him, almost every week in his dream. And he seemed good spirits. He seemed like, he seemed to be in good health and in good spirits. I think this was just like last year. Not because, there's been several statues of Lemmy, right? This was like a new one. This was like either like the one that happened last year. So he spoke on that. I saw that video. Well, they're all standing outside, and then he was talking about it, and he's like, yeah, Lemmy visits me in my dream, like, almost every week. I still talk to him here and there. Uh, he seemed okay right there. I'm sure Mickey D is devastated. He hasn't said anything. So because I mean the four of them, right? Wurzel, Mickey D, right, and they've been in the band, right, for quite some time, and then it's just the three of them: Lemmy, Phil Campbell, and Mickey D. So yeah, I mean it's just it's crazy. I mean I don't know. Like I said, a lot of these thrash guys, they're about that age. They're like 64, 65 ish. And I think that I mean I don't know. Fast Eddie Clark said it best. I'll repeat it again. He said that this lifestyle is just not good for you. You know what I mean? It's not good for your health. It's not good for your. So, even just, even if you don't party, right? But just sort of going on the road, that will just, take a lot out of you because, you're eating junk, right? Just like Lemmy said on, We Are the Road Crew, right? You're eating junk, you're feeling bad. So I mean, it's pretty. It's a hectic, crazy lifestyle that is not really fit for everybody. It's not fit for everybody. It's not good for everybody. I think uh, that's why I think it's the image of the rock star is that you have this kind of golden god in a golden helmet that is just resilient to all this, right? He can go play, right, 25 shows in 30 days and go across the world and tour basically the whole year and then go back to recording and then live like a real hardcore hard lifestyle and he's still okay, right? That's kind of the image of the original rock star, right? So they really lived that up. So I think so yeah, I mean, great guitar player, great riff writer, great soloist, tasty, licks, right? In blues playing, we call like licks, like, a lick is like a piece of music, right? Right? So sometimes we call them tasty licks when they make you feel something. So he definitely had that feel. He definitely had that, the blues kind of feel. Uh, so yeah, I mean, it would have been. I don't know. I don't know where else his career would have went after here. Maybe he would have just continued, playing with the Suns, or Uh, I think right after Lemmy died, right, he kind of didn't really do right too much with involved in the Motorhead camp. I think, unless they called him for an interview or just like like these special ceremonies or something like that, because it probably took a lot out of him that the band that he was in ended, right, and then of course Lemmy being so close to him, right, it must have right. I'm guessing it took a toll on him. So it's like it's not easy for people to talk about that, for a long time. So you know, anyway, guys, yeah, I mean, very unexpected news. Very saddened by this. I mean, I don't know what else to say. Hopefully, I mean, I don't know, because people are already speculating and stuff, and then they're saying, oh, they're Motorhead is in up there somewhere, and they're uh, they're all playing there because the original band is back there, right? The lineup from the '80s, right? Phil. Oh wait, the drummer from Orgasmatron. I don't know what happened to him. So because I forgot there was a drummer from Orgasmatron. But yeah, I mean, we don't know if there's some kind of, who knows what happens when you die. If there's an afterlife, or people are already speculating that they're having a party up there, and because it's like that lineup of Phil Taylor, Phil Campbell, Lemmy, and Wurzel, right? That was the lineup for basically rock and roll 1916 and all the way up to 1994. So that incarnation of the band is up there playing. But yeah, just for anybody who knew him personally, of course, uh, I'm sure this is going to be a huge loss, as it is to every Motorhead fan out there. I think most Motorhead fans out there are kind of sad, just like I am. I mean, definitely, it is something to where his legacy can't be tarnished or touched, or his accomplishments can't be right. I mean, you can't downplay any of his efforts or his accomplishments or his solos or his riff writing, or uh, right. So I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm just kind of blabbing on. Anyway, guys, I'll talk to you later.